Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air change only to realize it was you who stirred it? You didn't say much. Maybe you just stood there quietly, observing. And yet, people shifted in their seats, conversations softened, glances flickered toward you. Some were intrigued, others unnerved. This isn't about arrogance. This isn't about charm. This is about energy, the invisible language of presence. Some people carry an aura so intense, so quietly commanding, that it doesn't just enter a room, it alters it. Their energy is like a mirror. It reflects what others would rather not see. Their presence doesn't conform, doesn't beg for approval, doesn't shrink to fit the expectations around them. And that, quite frankly, disturbs people. Why? Because most of us live in masks, subtle ones, shaped by years of social conditioning. When someone shows up unmasked, whole, and self-aware, it disrupts the rhythm we've come to expect. Their strength reminds others of their own hidden insecurities. Their clarity exposes confusion. Their calm reveals chaos. Their authenticity dares others to confront their own layers. And few are ready for that kind of confrontation. Carl Jung, Swiss psychiatrist, pioneer of analytical psychology, understood this deeply. He wrote about the persona, the mask we wear to adapt to society, and the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress. When someone has integrated their shadow, when they've done the inner work and no longer need to play roles, they radiate something different, something powerful, sometimes even unsettling. We call it a strong aura. But what is it really? In modern terms, it's a resonance, a psychological and emotional frequency that transcends words. You can't fake it. And when you carry it, people look at you longer than usual. They feel drawn to you or threatened. You're misunderstood, labeled as too much or too intense, even when you're being completely yourself. But this isn't new. From mystics in ancient deserts to philosophers in Athenian forums, from shamans in tribal rituals to modern-day therapists, the concept of a person whose energy pierces the veil of surface interaction has been with us for centuries. Some were revered. Some were exiled. All were noticed. This video isn't just about listing signs. It's about helping you understand why this happens. And more importantly, how to embrace it. Because if your presence disturbs others, it might not be a problem. It might be your power. Let's explore it not just through signs, but through story, history, and the inner landscapes that Carl Jung spent his life trying to map. Long before we had words like aura, vibe, or energy, ancient cultures recognized something profound, that human beings emit more than just sound and light. They emit presence. In ancient India, this was called prana, the life force that flows through and around the body. Chinese philosophy speaks of qi, the vital energy governing not just individuals, but the balance of the cosmos. In indigenous traditions across the Americas and Africa, there are stories of spirit walkers, individuals whose energy was so finely tuned that animals, weather, and people responded to them without a word spoken. These weren't fantasies. They were early ways of understanding what we now, through psychology and physics alike, are starting to validate, that human beings are not just physical. We are electric, magnetic, emotional, symbolic. We communicate in more layers than language can reach. So what do we mean when we say someone has a strong aura? It's not about glowing light or mysticism in the pop culture sense. A strong aura is a field of self-possession, clarity, and internal alignment. You know who you are. You've met your shadow. You don't rely on external approval to define your value. That self-awareness creates a frequency, an energetic pattern that people can feel even if they can't explain it. Carl Jung, the psychologist whose work underpins much of our modern understanding of the unconscious mind, was fascinated by this. He observed that people who had integrated both their persona, the social mask, and their shadow, the repressed self, tended to radiate a psychological strength. It was unsettling to some because it disrupted the collective norms. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he warned, authenticity comes at a cost. In a world that rewards conformity, being fully yourself can feel like an act of rebellion. Let's trace this idea historically. In ancient societies. In ancient Greece, figures like Socrates were both admired and feared. Socrates never claimed to teach. He simply asked questions that made others confront their own contradictions. His presence alone disturbed the status quo, so much so, he was eventually sentenced to death. Why? Not for violence, but for corrupting the youth in truth, for being too awake. In early Christian mysticism, saints and prophets were described as radiating light, even glowing during moments of ecstatic clarity. But many were also imprisoned, cast out, or silenced. Their presence stirred discomfort in power structures that preferred compliance over truth. In Eastern philosophy, in Buddhist teachings, monks who attain satori moments of sudden enlightenment are said to carry a field of peace around them. But even that peace can disturb. Why? Because it exposes restlessness in others. The calm of the monk isn't aggressive, it's reflective. But for the ego, reflection can feel like accusation. Similarly, in Taoist philosophy, the sage lives in harmony with the Tao, the way of nature. Their actions are often simple, their words few, yet their presence has the weight of mountains. They do not push, but they move others. Not with force, but with truth. Scroll in the modern era. Fast forward to the 20th century. Carl Jung's work began to bridge the ancient and the modern. He didn't speak of auras in the esoteric sense, but he deeply understood the psychic energy of individuals. He believed that when someone works through their unconscious content, the traumas, dreams, instincts, and archetypes buried deep inside, they gain not only personal power, but kind of psychological gravity. That gravity, he suggested, could attract or repel. It could heal or disturb. It could transform, but not without resistance. This brings us to a key truth. Your energy doesn't disturb others because it's wrong. It disturbs them because it reveals something unspoken. In every age, there have been those who carried this power, from prophets to poets, shamans to scientists. Not all were celebrated. Many were ostracized. Why? Because the world is not always kind to mirrors. And that's what a strong aura often is, a mirror. When you walk through life with integrity, presence, and clarity, you reflect back to others their own discomforts. You don't need to say anything. Your very being becomes a challenge to the unconscious agreements around you, the agreements that keep people small, silent, and asleep. This is why history remembers certain figures not for what they did, but for what they awakened. It's easy to talk about energy or aura in poetic terms, and that has its place. But if we dig beneath the metaphor, psychology has a lot to say about why some people's presence feels heavier, more charged, or even unsettling to others. Let's start with Jung's core insight. The self is not a simple, singular identity. It's a constellation persona, ego, shadow, anima/animus, and the self with a capital S. Most people only live from the surface, the persona, or social mask. The version of ourselves we perform to get love, approval, and survival. But those who carry a strong aura, the kind that shifts a room, silences a crowd, or makes others glance twice, are often those who venture deeper. They've met their shadow, the parts they were taught to hide. The anger, the shame, the grief, the desire. And rather than reject those pieces, they've integrated them. They walk with them. And this integration creates wholeness, which, in Jungian psychology, is the essence of individuation. Here's the paradox. We are drawn to wholeness, but we are also threatened by it. Why? Because it highlights fragmentation in ourselves. The discomfort of coherence. Modern social psychology offers more clarity. One relevant concept is cognitive dissonance, the psychological tension that arises when someone's beliefs, feelings, or actions are out of alignment. Now imagine someone walks into the room whose inner and outer world are in alignment. They don't perform, they simply are. That congruence can be deeply unsettling for those still living in contradiction. It's not personal. It's not even conscious. It's projection, another concept Jung explored extensively. When someone is disturbed by your calm, your confidence, or your clarity, they may be projecting their own discomfort. Not because you're wrong, but because you embody what they haven't yet dared to explore. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung. This is why people with strong auras are often misunderstood. They might be seen as arrogant when they're simply confident, as intimidating when they're just centered, as too intense when they're just not interested in small talk or performative niceties. They are mirrors, and mirrors are rarely comfortable. Presence as social disruption. Let's move from psychology to sociology. In every society, there are social scripts, unspoken agreements about how to behave, speak, and even feel. When you show up grounded in your own script, especially one that deviates from the norm, you break the rhythm. You become what sociologists call a disruptive presence. Not because you're trying to cause conflict, but because you exist outside the default expectations. This happens in families, workplaces, friendships, even romantic dynamics. You might notice people shifting around you, becoming defensive, overly polite, or suddenly withdrawn. You might be accused of being too much or too intense. But in truth, what you're doing is disturbing the emotional homeostasis. Most people are comfortable in environments where nothing changes. When you walk in carrying clarity, truth, or self-ownership, that stability is threatened not because you're aggressive, but because you're alive in a system that depends on numbness. Milky Way energetic resonance, neuroception, and emotional contagion. From a physiological perspective, there's also something fascinating happening. The nervous system has a subconscious detection system known as neuroception, a term coined by Dr. Stephen Porges, creator of the polyvagal theory. It's the brain's way of scanning for safety or threat, not through conscious reasoning, but through felt signals. When someone with a strong aura walks into a space, they can trigger this system. Not because they are unsafe, but because their intensity is unfamiliar. If someone's baseline is avoidance, passivity, or people-pleasing, then your directness or groundedness might register as different, and therefore subconsciously as a possible threat. Similarly, psychology has confirmed what mystics always knew: emotions are contagious. Through mirror neurons, we unconsciously mimic the emotional state of those around us. A deeply self-aware, grounded person can create a kind of emotional coherence in a room, but only for those willing to attune. For others, it can feel like static. It's like walking into a still lake when you're used to stormy seas. The silence is disorienting. The stillness is loud. Archetypes and collective memory. Jung also spoke of archetypes, universal patterns of behavior and energy embedded in the human psyche. The strong aura type is often aligned with the magician, sage, warrior, or rebel archetypes. These figures are respected in myth, but often feared in real life. Why? Because they carry truth. And truth demands change. These archetypes live in our collective memory. And when someone embodies one of them in the real world, it stirs something ancestral: awe, fear, fascination. It's not just about you. It's about what you represent. You might remind someone of a teacher who once challenged them, of a parent who saw through their lies, of a version of themselves they're not ready to become. So they resist. They project. They withdraw. But none of that means you're wrong. In fact, it might be the most powerful confirmation that you're becoming real, and real is rare. There is a quiet cost to carrying a powerful presence. Not because there is anything wrong with you, but because most people are not ready for what you represent. And over time, this mismatch can begin to feel personal. You may find yourself asking, why do people seem uneasy around me? Why do they pull away just when I start to feel close? Why am I always the one who notices what no one wants to talk about? These aren't random patterns. They're consequences not of your flaws, but of your frequency. When your aura is strong, when your inner world is coherent, awake, and unafraid, it tends to trigger what others are suppressing. And unless they've done similar inner work, they won't always know why they feel uncomfortable. So they'll react in the only ways they know how: through distance, judgment, or dismissal. Misunderstood, misread, and mislabeled. People with strong auras are often misunderstood, deeply so. You might be perceived as arrogant when you're simply confident, as intense when you're just passionate, as cold when you're just observant and boundaried. These labels sting, especially if you grew up as an emotionally intelligent child in a world that didn't know how to handle that depth. Maybe you were the kid who felt everything, who saw through adult hypocrisies, who couldn't bear small talk, who preferred solitude to surface-level games. Over time, you may have learned to dim your light not because you wanted to, but because your light was making others squint. And this suppression creates a fracture. A psychic split between who you are and who you're allowed to be. Between what you know in your gut and what the world will comfortably tolerate. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung. When you do, others may not follow. And that can feel like abandonment. Relational echoes, why people pull away. In relationships, this dynamic becomes even more intense. The closer people get to you, the more of your energy they're exposed to. If they haven't met their own inner world, your presence can feel like pressure. Not because you're pressuring them, but because your very existence highlights their unresolved truths. You might become the therapist friend, the one everyone comes to for insight, but who rarely gets checked on. Or the partner who's too much emotionally, even though you're just honest. Or the employee who intimidates coworkers without trying, simply because you're efficient and don't play power games. It's not that you're doing something wrong. It's that you've stopped pretending, and that's disruptive in environments built on pretense. The result? Isolation. Not always physical, but emotional. A subtle sense that people don't see you fully. That you're too much or not enough, depending on the room. that you're always adapting to others' discomfort instead of being met in your depth. And that's a dangerous place to stay for too long, because it can lead to a distortion of self where you start wondering if maybe you are the problem. You're not. You are just early to your own awakening. Broken heart, the cost of shrinking. To avoid judgment, many people with strong energy learn to shrink themselves. They silence their intuition. They water down their truths. They fake comfort in uncomfortable spaces. They soften their gaze, their voice, their posture, not for harmony, but for permission. But the more you shrink, the more out of alignment you become. Your nervous system knows it. Your creativity dries up. Your relationships feel hollow. Your body feels tired. Because pretending to be small is exhausting when your soul knows it was made to expand. This is how depression can creep in. Not always as sadness, but as a slow, subtle numbness. A loss of meaning. A disconnection from the very force that once made you feel alive. And yet, there is a deep irony here. Many people seek exactly the kind of energy that disturbs them. They crave truth, depth, wisdom. But when it arrives in human form in you, they don't know how to receive it. They haven't prepared themselves to sit in the presence of what they say they want. This is where your suffering becomes sacred. Not because pain is noble, but because it pushes you inward. It forces you to anchor in your truth, even when the world resists it. It teaches you discernment, who is truly safe, who can hold your depth, who sees your presence not as a threat, but as a mirror and a gift. Historical echoes of the disturbed presence. History is full of examples. Hypatia of Alexandria, the philosopher and mathematician whose brilliance and integrity made her both adored and assassinated. Nikola Tesla, whose vision was too advanced for his time, and whose solitude was misunderstood as madness. Frida Kahlo, whose bold emotional honesty disturbed the norms of femininity and art. Jung himself, who was seen as eccentric, unorthodox, even dangerous for daring to explore the soul in an age that worshipped rationality. Their energy wasn't always welcomed, but it was true, and that truth left an imprint on humanity. So too does yours. If your energy disturbs others not because it is loud or aggressive, but because it is aligned, conscious, and truthful, then your task is not to dim it. Your task is to learn how to live with it, to carry your presence as a blessing, not a burden, to walk with your gravity, not apologize for it, and to create inner peace in a world that often mistakes stillness for threat. This is an easy work, but it is sacred work. And here's where we begin. 1. Master self-awareness before seeking validation. The first step is internal anchoring. You must know your own patterns, shadows, and values so intimately that outside reactions, praise or rejection, don't define your reality. Jung called this the path to individuation, becoming a whole, integrated self, no longer divided between what you are and what you present. Ask yourself, where do I shrink to make others comfortable? Where do I confuse criticism with truth? What reactions in others still trigger self-doubt in me? These are your entry points. Not for self-blame, but for self-ownership. Journal regularly. Observe your emotional responses like weather without judgment. What stirs your anxiety? Will you avoid saying? These are mirrors into unconscious scripts still running beneath the surface. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. 2. Embody, don't explain. You don't need to justify your depth. People with powerful auras often feel the pressure to soften themselves, to make their clarity more palatable, their boundaries more digestible, their insights less intimidating. But here's the truth. Real transformation doesn't come from convincing. It comes from embodiment. Let your energy speak before your words do. Let your calm unsettle chaos. Let your silence speak where noise once ruled. You don't need to explain your peace to those still addicted to war. 3. Protect your energy like it's sacred because it is. One of the biggest risks for people with strong energy is energetic burnout, not because of how much you give, but because of how deeply you absorb. You feel people's emotions. You sense what's unspoken. And you try, often unconsciously, to balance the room. This is noble, but it's not sustainable. You must learn to disengage without disconnecting, to hold compassion without enmeshment, to say no not out of coldness but clarity. Try this. Before entering a crowded or emotionally intense space, pause. Breathe deeply. Visualize a light, a field, a boundary around your body. Name your intention. I do not absorb what is not mine. After social interactions, take time alone. Walk, bathe, write, release. Don't carry what isn't yours. Even empathy needs edges. 4. Build environments that can hold your depth. Not everyone will get you, but some will. Find them. One of the most healing things for someone with strong energy is being seen without resistance. Not idolized, not feared, just seen. Seek relationships where honesty is welcome, where silence is honored, where growth is mutual. You don't need hundreds of people, just a few real ones. A tribe who recognizes your soul, not just your surface. And while you're building that, become that space for yourself. Let your journal, your practices, your creative expression be places where nothing needs to shrink. You will become a sanctuary by first becoming your own. 5. Balance expression with solitude. Strong auras need solitude like lungs need air. Not as an escape, but as recalibration. Without solitude, your energy becomes reactive. You start absorbing the static of the world instead of emitting your own frequency. This is why mystics retreat, why warriors meditate, why visionaries vanish before they reappear with clarity. Make time for stillness. Unplug for a full day, once a week. Take silent walks, no music, no distractions. Practice meditation, even 5 minutes a day. Write letters to your future self. In solitude, you remember that your value doesn't depend on being understood. It depends on being true. 6. Blend psychology with ancient wisdom. Modern psychology offers tools, but ancient traditions offer roots. When you feel overwhelmed by your intensity, return to the practices of those who walked this path before you. Stoicism teaches emotional discipline. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Marcus Aurelius. Sufi wisdom teaches presence through love. You were born with wings. Why prefer to crawl through life? Rumi. Taoism teaches effortless power. A leader is best when people barely know he exists. Try combining these with therapeutic tools. Use cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, to challenge false beliefs around being too much. Use parts work/internal family systems to tend to the parts of you still seeking external approval. Use somatic techniques to ground your energy in your body, not just your mind. Let your growth be multidimensional, modern and ancient, mental and mystical. 7. Lead by frequency, not force. If your presence disturbs others, don't shrink it. Refine it. There's a difference between raw energy and refined power. One pushes, the other pulls. One demands attention, the other commands it silently. True influence doesn't require dominance. It radiates from self-trust. It bends the world, quietly, without control. You don't have to teach everyone. You don't have to be liked by everyone. You simply have to be true consistently, humbly, without apology. Daily practice prompts. What part of me am I hiding to avoid being misunderstood? Where am I leaking energy trying to fix or please others? What would it feel like to just be, without needing to prove or perform? Final truth. Your aura is not too much. It's too honest for a dishonest world. Too clear for a confused system. Too awake for those still sleeping. But that doesn't mean you need to shrink. It means you need to stand. Not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. Because the world doesn't need more performance. It needs more presence. And yours is rare. What if the very thing that makes others uncomfortable is also what makes you powerful? Throughout history, the most radiant souls were rarely the most accepted. They were the ones who walked ahead of their time not out of ego, but because their inner compass refused to point anywhere but truth. And truth has always disturbed the unready. Carl Jung once said, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." The same could be said of presence. A person who has not learned to stand in the weight of their energy, unapologetically and peacefully, has not yet discovered its grace. Your strong aura is not a problem. It is a mirror, a torch, a signal to those still hiding from themselves. And yes, it may come with loneliness, with misunderstanding, with the ache of being seen too little or too late. But it also comes with vision, with resilience, with the kind of inner peace that no external approval can manufacture. Because when you finally stop asking, "How do I make them comfortable?" and start asking, "How do I remain in integrity?" something shifts. You move from being a chameleon to becoming a compass. You stop dimming and start guiding. Not by force, but by frequency. The final reflection. So here you are. 13 signs that your energy, raw, refined, radiant, is not only real, but rare. That your truth disturbs not because it's wrong, but because it's real. That your presence bends rooms, challenges dynamics, and awakens others simply by existing. What you do with this? You honor it. You protect it. And most of all, you live it. Not for applause. Not for rebellion. But because to abandon your frequency is to abandon your soul. And the world doesn't need more polite masks. It needs more awake hearts. Ask yourself, what if being misunderstood was never a rejection, but a redirection? What if discomfort in others was just the birth pain of your true self emerging? What if your aura isn't a warning, but a wake-up call? You are not here to be explainable. You are here to be undeniable. So stay true, and let them adjust. Your aura is not a problem, it's a message. If something inside you stirred during this video, if you felt seen, remembered, or finally named, then this message was meant for you. Now is the time to stop shrinking, to stop apologizing for your clarity, your power, your presence, and to start standing in your truth fully, fiercely, and without explanation. Don't just watch. Integrate. Journal the moments that hit you hardest. Share this with someone who needs reminding that their energy is not too much, it's medicine. And subscribe not just for content, but for community. A space where deep souls and strong auras are not only welcome, they're home. You're not alone. You're not broken. You're becoming. Own your frequency. Let the world adjust.